Welcome to another edition of
The Sunken Place.
I'm Tananarive.
I'm Stephen Barnes.
We are authors and screenwriters and teachers, and this is lecture three, of our Black horror webinar, The Sunken Place. I hope you guys have had a great break. We had a break.
Yeah!
We had a break for a couple weeks. Some of you are celebrating Mardi Gras, lucky dogs. The rest of us are still just celebrating Black Panther.
That's right. It's, I don't know, some of you will be watching this a long time from now, but this is the week that Black Panther opens. So we're happy about that.
Getting very close.
The antithesis of horror. So we have the yin and the yang of a Black expression of fantasy, the light and the dark.
Exactly.
You know,
I mean, well put.
With the dark being the good stuff and the light. No, I'm not going to say that.
And
the yin and the yang.
And as I recently described it in an interview, the 1-2 punch of Get Out almost a year ago to the day of the release of Black Panther. And both films, history making in their own ways. And Jordan Peele has the added bonus that he's not building his on a mythology that had existed for decades. It's an original story from a single artist, and he was able to make $250 million.
But we don't want to get into that too much because of the fact that we'll talk about this on the Life Writing site. Let's get into the Sunken Place.
Let's get to the photos, darling.
Okay.
In our last class, as you might remember, we had an interview with Get Out writer-director Jordan Peele, now Oscar-nominated writer-director Jordan Peele. He was not at the time he did our interview, but he was when he came out to UCLA. I believe it was January 30th, I want to say, or 31st, to see my Sunken Place class at UCLA. This is actually a photo that came from my video of the event. So I was basically holding my camera up almost in his face, to tell you the truth. And I like this photo because it captures this sort of smile on his face. The last time he came to my class, there were only 60-some students there. Because I have a bigger class, I have about 70 students now, and I invited the previous class, and we had extra students from the film department and whatever. He had a really glowing crowd. You can see they're all filming him with their cameras, just like I was. And it was just so fun. So as if that wasn't enough, the night before, thank you to Anthony Bresnikan, the Entertainment Weekly reporter who covers Marvel. I got a tweet from him, direct message one day saying, hey, you probably already hooked up, but I have an extra ticket to the Black Panther premiere. And I was like, yes, I'll go. So that is actually, this is not Photoshopped. Okay, this is actually me standing in front of the Black Panther and the sign, and you can see the Dora Milaje a little bit in the background. I'm wearing this beautiful South African crown, basically, that I found in a store in LA called Kutula by Africana. And I'm also wearing the earrings today that I bought for my Black Panther outfit. A lot of you probably already have your Black Panther outfits picked out. I know I do, and you're looking at it. So enough of that, though. Let's go to what we'll be talking about today in our lecture. We'll be discussing horror classic and Black horror classic, and we'll tell you why. Night of the Living Dead, directed by George A. Romero, the late, great George A. Romero.
The short film Wake by Bree Newsom.
Eve's Bayou, a beautiful, beautiful piece of magical realism from the 1990s by Cassie Lemons.
And something called The Good House by a very promising novelist I've heard about named Tananarive.
She's new. We'll see if she's okay.
Yeah, I think she's all right.
She's okay. She's all right. So this is fun because I really just talked about Night of the Living Dead with my UCLA class.
Shall we go to the next one?
Sure. And a lot of them have never seen it, which is always shocking to me when I say, show of hands, how many of you have never seen the original Star Wars? You know, how many of you have never seen Night of the Living Dead? So the vast majority of students had never seen the original Night of the Living Dead.
You know, the interesting thing about it is its impact was massive, but the tropes within it have been used so much that it's easy to underestimate it. So you say, oh, it's black and white, it's slow paced, but the thing is, it really is a clockwork piece of dread producing film. I mean, it is a frightening piece of film. It's one of the 3 or 4 most frightening movies I've ever seen. In terms of the fear reaction I had while I was watching it,
right?
At the time, I remember sitting in the Wiltern Theater in Los Angeles on Western and Wilshire Boulevard, and midnight showing of Night of the Living Dead. And I remember sitting there, and I was in my mid-20s, I guess, and I was looking around for the exits, trying to figure out which exit would I go out of if the people around me turned into zombies and came after me.
So I mean, it was that visceral.
It was that visceral. It was terrifying.
And did that level of fright, do you feel like that was amplified for you as a film goer because Dwayne Jones, who in the lead part of Ben, is black?
You know, I would say it would have to be. I mean, I'm gonna switch out the picture. Just, I'd never seen a horror film with a black lead before. It was the first time, so it was a little disorienting. And it looks so much like a newsreel. The images are so flat and realistic, and just sort of the camera does not move very much. Just sort of, here it is. It's just happening. The direction does not bring attention to itself. You know, the performances are uniformly realistic. There's a couple of performances that aren't quite wonderful. They're coming to get you and take your SAG card, Barbara. So,
do you think, I'm wondering, the black and white, even the decision to shoot it in black and white?
That was originally a cost-saving decision, just a lot cheaper.
But the effect of it is,
yes,
it looks like those newsreels.
And not only that, but it made the special effects. When it was time for bad things to start happening in that movie, the black and white covered the imperfections in the effects. You know, so blood looked dark. You didn't have that. Well, that looks a little bit too much like cherry cough. Because one of the things that is true in horror films, when it gets too intense, you'll start saying to yourself, "It's only a movie. It's only a movie. It's only a movie." In order to kind of deal with it, that black and white newsreel sense, and then a lot of television was in black and white back then.
Right.
So the newsreel footage of, you know, people in black and white talking in Washington and here and there. So it all felt of a piece.
Yes.
You know, I sat there in the audience, and it felt like I was experiencing something that I'd never seen before. And by the time the ugliness, the real ugliness started, the characters you cared about started dying, you felt it.
By the way, I want to say, if you like what you're hearing and you happen to have Twitter open in another tab, please do tweet under the hashtag Sunken Place Class so people know what we're talking about. Sunken Place Class hashtag. Let's go just for a synopsis. For those of you, it might have been a while since you've seen it, or you didn't quite have time to watch it. Night of the Living Dead is basically the first modern zombie film, in the sense that zombie films before Night of the Living Dead really portrayed zombies as mindless shamblers. The horror was the idea of losing your sense of self, losing your sense of identity, and that was what drove previous horror films. In this film, zombies became flesh-eating ghouls, tool-bearing flesh-eating ghouls who were not only stripped of identity and would not respond to loved ones, but they would attack and eat you.
You know, previously the term zombie had to do with Haitians. Right. You know, basically people either returning from the dead or people who'd taken the zombie cucumber neurotoxin, tetrodotoxin or whatever that.
I stumbled over that myself, trying to say it recently in my class. And also, even though the lore was from Haiti, I'll point out that in some earlier Hollywood films, any island location was subject to have zombies.
The image systems largely came from an Italian film called Last Man on Earth, starring Vincent Price, which is an early version of I Am Legend, or made earlier than that with I Am Legend with Will Smith, Omega Man with Charlton Heston, and then Last Man on Earth with Vincent Price, where he is being hunted by these sort of vampire things. And if you watch that movie, you can see a lot of the same sorts of images of people being threatened by soulless, mindless ghouls, same sort of flat black and white, hands tearing at boards, these sorts of things. You can really tell what George Romero, took these images from. And he made his really super inexpensive film, one location, pretty much, and some guerrilla style, footage. And what you had there was a serious triumph of imagination.
Right. So they can break a window. They can pick up a brick and break a window. Even Walking Dead zombies don't do that. I don't even think even as violent as they were, World War Z zombies did that. So zombies came on strong in Romero's film. Tool bearing, much more dangerous. Mr. Cooper, the white man is always talking about how they turned over his car.
Yes.
So basically, Barbara, it opens at a cemetery where Barbara and her brother are paying their respects. And for some reason, zombies appear. John, her brother, gets hurt. Barbara runs away. She stumbles and falls. Very typical woman, damsel in distress imagery coming from this particular character, Barbara. She makes it to a house, finds a black man played by Dwayne Jones. Can we go back to
You betcha.
Dwayne Jones and Barbara, the two of them? And there's a scene I show my students because I also show a scene from this in the context of the explosive interracial imagery. Okay, there are other characters who appear in The Walking Dead, but for a good part of this film,
you mean Night of the Living Dead?
Night of the Living Dead. So sorry, Night of the Living Dead. See, that's why I have you here correcting me. But for a good part of this film, it's only Ben and Barbara. And at one point, when Barbara is hysterical, insisting they need to go outside, they need to find John, she slaps Dwayne Jones, and Dwayne Jones hits her with his closed fist and knocks her unconscious. As I was arguing to my students, not so much an approval of violence against women as he felt that she was going to cause danger, that she was going to need to leave the house and let the zombies in, or she might harm him in some way. So I think he intentionally knocked her out. It wasn't like, oh, you're hysterical, slap back. No, I needed you to sleep for a while, which is what happened. So remember, people, this is 1968. This is a year after Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, where you had the very safe image of Sidney Poitier.
This was sort of more like Guess Who's Going to Be Dinner.
Oh, good one. Good one. So there was nothing safe about Dwayne Jones. He hit Barbara. He hit Mr. Cooper.
That's right.
He's killing white zombie after white zombie after white zombie. And this is, again, 1968, coincidentally timed with the aftermath of Dr. King's assassination. So what you have in 1968, for those of you who weren't there or weren't aware, is the Vietnam War and lots of war footage coming back home and the horror of the growing death toll from Vietnam. You have that against also Dr. King's assassination and civil unrest in cities all over, insurrection, like you call it, all over the country. And also, say you're a white person with racist tendencies, it's kind of feeling like the world is falling apart, like the monkeys are out of the zoo from your point of view. Jeez. After the civil rights. I mean,
the kind of thing that would almost make someone vote for Donald Trump.
Right. So take a Trump voter from today, back in 1968, and you're like, what? A Voting Rights Act? What? A Civil Rights Act? Oh, wait, now they can just order food anywhere? Oh, now they're going to take my job? Or whatever, goes through racist minds. I'm just guessing. And you have a film where not only is the protagonist this actor Dwayne Jones, but the biggest antagonist in some ways is the
white guy that in most cases would have been the hero.
Right. I mean, he might have been the hero. And Steve and I have debates about whether who was right about whether they should have stayed in the basement or stayed in the house. Now, Steve, what's your thought on that?
My thought is that in actuality, he got them all killed.
Well, here's my thought on it. My thought on it is there was nothing wrong with the plan to stay in the house as long as you could retreat back to the basement. And he did. He made it. It's not his fault that Barbara ran off because she saw John. It's not his fault that other woman didn't have sense enough to move away from the window. So anyway, so there's that debate. Who was right? But the fact of the matter is the argument raged. And at one point, Dwayne Jones's Ben was absolutely, in fact, he gives this great speech. Let me find the speech. The speech he gave, where basically I'll paraphrase it. It's too bad for her. Her old man is so stupid. Go down the cellar if you want. You can be the boss down there. I'm the boss up here. And at this point, it's like, get out of here. So again, in the minds of a racist viewer or even a viewer who has been lulled into sort of an unconscious racism, like a lot of people, in fact, most people are unconsciously racist because they're just not used to seeing this. So there's something about the film that's already really unsettling you, even before the Fangoria style eating of intestines and this kind of thing.
Look, even the eating of intestines and the munching on people wasn't as bad as the first major transgression. I mean, the first major transgression was the black character, being in control. We'd never seen that in a film. Not that I can think of. I certainly hadn't. But the scene where the little girl kills her mother.
Right.
That is the kind of thing, once again, you simply didn't put in movies.
Right.
Stabbing her in the chest with a trowel.
Yes.
What? I mean, you just don't do that. So
that's probably for a lot of people the most frightening moment in the film.
It's an amazing moment. And at that point, I can tell you how it felt in the audience. How it felt in the audience is that we were suddenly thrust into the middle of the story, and we had no idea where the story was going to go.
Right.
We were out of control. We were no longer in control of the experience. It was a terrifying experience. We were totally in the hands of the filmmaker at that point.
So I want to address a little bit of the controversy that has emerged about the casting of Dwayne Jones in Night of the Living Dead. Because apparently George A. Romero, and I read an interview, he died recently, but I read an interview where he again was sort of saying that the casting was an accident, that Dwayne Jones was a friend. He read for the part. He was the best one. And based on some of the other actors, I can see how that was certainly the case. He was the best one. And there was no intentional social messaging in making a black man the lead. I can agree. I can believe that up to a point, but here's where I would pipe in with this question of art being in the eye of the beholder as opposed to the creator. It seems to me that at some point during the filming, and how it couldn't have been day one, I don't even understand, he would have seen what the dailies were looking like. He would have looked through that camera lens and seen how he had a black actor being very strong-willed at the forefront, acting violently against whites in his lead, or leading rather. And there were many scenes, like when they're all huddled around the radio, I don't have the slide here, where it's very clear Dwayne Jones is very much in the forefront. Everyone else is in the background. And his force of personality controls this entire film. How that did not look revolutionary, even in the, at the time, if it was intentional, I don't know. But let's look at this. And this is where I say there are only a few things I think would have been different about this film if George Romero had been a black filmmaker. I think there would have been a black woman with him, perhaps as a mate, that he would have been more well-rounded. He was the only one who didn't have family in the film, the way it's written. So I think a black director...
Frankly, I think the young kids would have been black.
Okay. Yeah, maybe that you're right. And also, Steve was pointing out earlier, what did you say you think would have been different?
Let's see.
The script and the dialogue.
The script and the dialogue. There would have been some mention of race in the dialogue. There's no way to believe that the white father who is prepared to murder him by shutting him out with the zombies would not at some point, at that point in American history, have slipped and said something.
The N-word.
Yeah, I mean, I think
you can almost hear the N-word.
You can almost hear it.
The whole movie.
The N-word is silent. It's just natural, even if he's not particularly racist.
Right.
At that point, it's that us versus them. You're not gonna, let that blank, tell us what to do. It's our lives, and I think that harsh language, reducing people to a symbol of a group as opposed to an individual, which is one of the things that racial epithets do. It's very difficult to believe that he would not have said something harsh at some point. And it would have been totally believable, and I wouldn't have even held it against him in particular.
No, it would have just added to the realism.
Yeah.
And what also feels very real to me, and one of the reasons I argue that Night of the Living Dead is very much a part of the black horror canon, even though the filmmaker is white, is the decisions at the end. This white mob, I'm sorry. And by the way, black viewers were very, very supportive of this film and probably had a lot to do with the film's initial success because they recognized what they were seeing, a metaphor for the ways that society felt like it was breaking down. From a black viewer's point of view, it's with Dr. King dead, the movement shot down. Even today, everyone's like, oh, where are we without Dr. King? So imagine how that felt in 1968.
Yeah.
And here, the white mob that is supposed to represent law and order, well, you saw what happened at the end. Dwayne Jones stands in the window, he has a gun in his hand, he gets shot, and boom, end of story. And in some ways, those black and white photograph style images as the credits are rolling, where his body is being thrown on the pyre and burned.
Yes.
Faceless, nameless, storyless. I mean, that's so jarring.
It looks a lot like black and white images you saw of lynch mobs and burned black bodies and so forth.
I mean, what black audience member was going to look at this crowd and think they were the saviors? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I mean, the minute they show up,
I mean,
I know we're in trouble.
Watching a bunch of good old boys with rifles coming towards me, the first thing I do not think is, thank goodness I'm saved.
Exactly. So whether it was intentional or not, it remains nonetheless a very strong social statement from the end of the 1960s about changes in society, war overseas, and civil rights and racial problems at home. It really stands up in that way. Some of the acting, yes, is uneven. I want to speak very briefly about the women in the film. I talked about poor Barbara. There are two other women in the film. Mrs. Cooper, who is somewhat traditional. She wears a dress, but she really stands up to her husband. You know, she's not one of those stumble and fall types. At one point, she says to her husband, "Oh, that's important for you, isn't it, to feel like you're right?" So she's jabbing at him. She's not accepting his direction and his domination in the film any more than Ben is, frankly. And then there's another woman who is younger, somewhat counterculture. She wears jeans. She has long hair, kind of hippie-ish. So I think that that's sort of a visual nod to the Vietnam era counterculture. So he has three different kinds of women represented in the film. Barbara is the shocky, sort of stereotypical one. But there are two others. Of course, none of them survive. It doesn't matter what kind of woman you are or what kind of man you are in the end. There's nothing that you can do in the face of this coming plague of ghouls and those who purport to be ghoul killers. So it's a very, very pale ending, as Steve would have said in Lion's Blood.
Yeah, I think that we were asked whether or not the racial subtext was deliberate. I think it was not deliberate during the development process. By the time they were shooting the movie, I'm sure, as Tananari said, that somebody started noticing what these images looked like. By the time they saw the success of the film and they started reading the reviews of the film and critical analyses of the film, I think that
ding, 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 ding.
Yeah, he started making the social subtext more of the text.
So that he came back to it again in the sequel, Dawn of the Dead, which also had a strong black man in the lead.
And Day of the Dead and Land of the Dead.
In Dawn of the Dead, he survived the film.
Yes.
So that was a difference there. So that is Night of the Living Dead, horror classic. Jordan Peele references it a lot when he talks about black horror. Here's one that you may not have seen except hearing about it through this course. It was the short film. Let me talk a little bit about Bree Newsome first. We have spoken to Bree Newsome for a previous class, our Afrofuturism class. I did screen her short film Wake when I was at Spelman College as a part of my Octavia Butler celebration of the arts, or the speculative arts. And I love the fact that she is both an activist and an artist, as I suspect many of you are. There's something about speculative fiction, and horror is in that category, that seems to draw activist types. I don't know why it is, but I think it's because of the way we like to use the power of our imagination.
Storytelling.
Yeah, to just see a different world in a different way. And that's what activists do. They want to see a different world in a different way. So in the wake of the Charleston massacre, when the rest of us were still in shock, she and other activists were enraged that even though the American flag had been lowered, the Confederate flag, to the half staff anyway, the Confederate flag was still flying high. The funeral party for the victims had to travel underneath that flag. And there was a very specific plan. She basically volunteered of the group to do it for several reasons. And she went down and she did what she needed to do. So I have immense respect for Bree Newsome. And as someone who has climbed that high height, really literally risking her life, and then who knows what you subject yourself to when you're arrested. So just the courage to do that astounds me about her.
Well, actually, it's one of the things that it gives me the greatest amount of hope and optimism about the future, that we have a generation of kids, black and white, who are not interested in closing the door on the past.
Yeah, other people in that group who might have climbed up were included white men, but they decided, no, Bree was like.
I mean, look, if you were born after 1990 or after the year 2000, really, what in the world do you have to do with Jim Crow? Why in the world should you defend that crap?
Right. Why unless you're invested in it.
Unless you're invested in it. But I just think that more and more, it's like, I just want to get on with my life. I want to live. I want to love. I want to love who I want to love. I want the friends that I want. If you don't have to drag that crap with you, you can travel more rapidly. So I look at Bree and I see such courage, and such clarity. But I think that she was willing to risk herself to rid the world of a symbol of horror.
Right.
When we talk about horror, you generally start with, all art starts with some core emotion, something that you are feeling, and then you use your craft to convey that feeling. Horror, if George Romero starts with, let's say, I'm going to do a movie about the fear of dead things coming to kill us, and then we turn into the dead and we kill the people we love. That's kind of a generic thing. But by the time he got finished, he started seeing the social layers.
Right.
Okay. So, and then he started bending his future films to that. I'm sure he probably had a social consciousness, but I don't think he set out to do that initially. He
talked about in our interview how he had not thought of racism as systemic, that he thought of it as sort of individual bigotry, and it was in writing the film he began to better understand the systemic nature of racism.
Okay.
Yeah, so it is fascinating how the true life fears, which is what fueled Get Out, and I would say probably also feared Wake, can be channeled.
Let's talk a little bit about Wake.
The artwork. So let's go to Wake. This was a student film. Every time I watch it, I'm more and more impressed at what a student filmmaker on a very limited budget was able to pull out of that story with her details, her direction, from the ticking clock to the fly. I mean, she really told a story. And in case you didn't get a chance to watch it, it's a short. So, if you'd rather pause and wait and watch it and not have the spoilers, I understand. But basically, a young woman, this woman here, we see that she's just lost her father. His father basically had a heart condition, and she withheld the medication from him. It's very subtle. You can almost miss it the first time. But she withheld his medication, watched him die, and as soon as she left that burial, she took some soil and she went to the woods to conjure, and she wanted to conjure the perfect man who is pictured here in the photo. And he was perfect. He looks just like the man she asked for, even down to his green eyes. He's so dapper and well-mannered until he isn't. And the reason the spell begins to go wrong is because it started out wrong. You can't make right from wrong. She let her father die. So basically, her spell was cursed before she even set out to those woods. And that's what happens with magic. Those rules of magic will come back and bite you. It's a cautionary tale. The corrupted magic in Wake.
Go on to the next one?
No, just leave it there for
okay.
a second. Opens the door to the birth of corrupted creatures. Wake is a cautionary tale that is ultimately about human monstrosity. This film embodies the Black horror aesthetic and fighting. Well, first of all, sometimes when there's no oppositional theme like black and white, you might ask, well, does that count as a Black horror aesthetic? Of course it does, because one of the biggest things we're fighting is erasure in storytelling. So just existing is still a revolutionary act in Black horror. So no, there's no oppositional racism in this story, but it's fighting erasure. And it's also drawing from myths and beliefs, folklore, hoodoo, these conjuring traditions that a lot of the readers actually either follow or their grandparents did.
Black film would be filmed from the children of the diaspora or about them. And most of what it is that we are is just human. We live, we
Absolutely.
love, we watch our parents age, we want to raise a family. And so if you're taking a look at the damage between Black men and women, the amount of fear, the amount of hope and yearning that there is there, it's absolutely, it's us. If it's human and it's made Black by or about Black people, it is a Black film.
Right. And I also want to point out, when it comes to cautionary tales, especially in Black communities, I'll say especially in the South, but not always just in the South. I'll focus on the South for now. It was very important to walk a very straight line. You did not have a lot of room for mistakes. In the novel I'm working on right now, I'm having to write about a young man named Willie Howard, who lived in Live Oak, Florida, in I believe it was 43. He wrote a 15-year-old boy wrote a love note to a little white girl at his workplace, and his father and a friend dragged him out of his mother's arms that night at gunpoint, and they bound his hands and feet and made him jump in the river while his father watched, because he wrote A Love Note. Okay, so for parents and children, or even for adults.
43?
1943.
That's only 9 years before I was born.
Exactly. It was, yes, it feels like just the day before yesterday. And no one would indict. No one would indict, even though the father told what happened, because this man was the postmaster. Very fine people. You know what I'm saying? So that's why that term very fine people, really great. Sometimes very fine people also murder young black boys because they wrote a love note to their daughter. So this is the backdrop for a lot of these cautionary tales. So it's not just, you're not going to always just teach your children how to be cautious when you're around white people. Let's also be cautious when we're around the forces of magic. And that is something that comes up very often in Black horror, including the next two works, which are Eve's Bayou and my novel, The Good House, as we start to transition into magical realism. Eve's Bayou, I believe this came out in 1997. I wrote that before I checked it. But anyway, it's either 1997 or 1990. Oh, I was right. 1997. That's the year we met, honey. So this was, as we came to learn, basically the tail end of the 90s horror film renaissance that had started in the late 80s and created a lot of great Black films that we still enjoy today that don't have counterparts. And Eve's Bayou is one of those that came out of that era. This was basically a first film by Cassie Lemons. She was an actress, is still an actress, and also a screenwriter. And she wrote this film for herself, actually. She really wanted to act in it. She wanted to play the part of Aunt Moselle, who is the sister of Samuel L. Jackson in this story. But in the end, she decided that she was just going to direct it. So let's talk a little bit about some of the themes in Eve's Bayou, and then I'll give you a plot synopsis for those of you who may not have finished it or didn't get a chance to watch it. Please do watch it, even after you've heard this. I've seen it many times, and I still find new things to discover each time I go back to it. It is just beautifully shot. It is a beautiful sample of Black life. It's a historical piece set in an entirely Black community, which is why that theme of community comes up. Again, this is not a film that is about opposition to white supremacy. I mean, you might assume that the Black men who go into town to work are having experiences that they bring home to the juke joint, you know, and there may be some bar fights, but that's not the focus, and that's really never brought up in the story. It's a Black story. It's about a Black family, and the only antagonists are the ones who sit at your dinner table, basically. So magic and ritual comes up in this. We have a more traditional hoodoo woman. We'll talk about that. We have Aunt Moselle, who believes she knows the future. Even Eve dabbles in hoodoo by the end of this. So magic and ritual are a big part of this story. Secrets, as in The Good House, secrets are very much a part of this story. Betrayal and retribution, curses, whether you believe they're real or not, responsibility, casual monstrosity.
What do you mean by casual monstrosity?
Well, the Samuel L. Jackson character, in most ways, is a wonderful guy. He provides for his family. He's very loving with his daughters, perhaps too loving. But we don't know. You never know exactly what happened there at the end. He's polite to everyone. He's dapper. He's a physician, but he's carrying out these affairs that are so obvious, like literally under his daughter's nose, to the point that he rips a hole in the fabric of this family.
Got it.
And that opens the door for the loss of innocence, which is what poor Eve suffers. So you can just see here, I mean, look at this shot right here. That is so beautifully composed. This is Eve, played by a very, very young Jurnee Smollett. She's still an actress. You might remember her now, obviously, from Underground. I'm so sad that got canceled. She was fierce in Underground. And there is Aunt Moselle, Debbie Morgan, ended up getting that part. And the whole film is shot with the kind of beauty and composition that you see here. The whole film looks like it was shot at dusk. Basically, every single scene looks like it was shot at the most beautiful time of day. And it starts with a celebration in the beginning. It's a party, and we see the happiness. Even though she's got some sibling rivalries. So the opening scene sets up sibling rivalries. between the sisters for their father's affection. So that theme is sowed early. They're rivals for their father's affection. And even the mother feels like she has rivals for her affection. But other than that, it's a party. People are dancing. It feels authentic to that community. Really beautiful, beautiful opening, but it all starts to go wrong when secrets emerge. Secrets are basically a character in this story. This is the older sister at the point when she's being sent away later in the film. But secrets begin from the very first party scene when Eve wanders into one of the side buildings and finds her father literally having sex with a woman who is not her mother. And they try to make her feel like she didn't see what she thought she saw. And, you know, children try really hard to believe you. She always looks like she kind of believes it, but she doesn't believe it. And she confides to her sister, and her sister doesn't want to believe it. So this idea of having secrets, not being able to share secrets, not being able to tell secrets, especially those secrets in your own home, can make that so difficult to watch. I almost want to give a trigger warning with this film, and I forgot to do that for you guys. But for my students at UCLA, I usually try to give a trigger warning because of the incest themes in this film. And unfortunately, it is a problem that students are dealing with in real life. But here's Samuel L. Jackson. Now, let me just say a word about Samuel L. Jackson in this film. He was riding high when he made this film. He had just done Pulp Fiction. He had just headlined his own action thriller, The Last Kiss Goodnight, with Gina Davis. There's a whole story behind that. He had done Die Hard with Avengers, The Great White Pipe, A Time to Kill. He was the go-to actor. He and Denzel, I guess, but really, even in terms of number of roles, Samuel L. Jackson was the go-to Black actor in the 90s. So for him to, lend his performance in a role that is really not that complimentary to him, okay? He's a bit monstrous in this part, casually, and also his name as the executive producer probably got the film made. And the centerpiece of the story is the love, as you see in that left panel, that journey her character Eve has for her daddy, that every little girl who has the opportunity, unless that love has been violated, really has for her daddy, you know? So, and he tries very hard to live up to that, look in her eyes, but ultimately his own frailties and his own mistakes make him unable to do that.
You know, somebody, was it Rory? Yes, hi, Rory. I said secrets destroy families.
Yeah,
absolutely. They destroy lives and they destroy communities. I have a great deal of faith in the human spirit, but I do, and so one of the reasons why I think that the more we bring things to light, the easier it is for us to make conscious decisions about whether or not this is the kind of person that I want to be, what this is the kind of family I want to have, or what this is the kind of society that I want to have. So horror, by bringing the things that we fear up to the surface, allowing a community of people in a theater to all share these emotions so that they can go out, you know, Greek theater, it was like you'd be given these scenarios of human frailty and what the gods thought about. And then afterwards you would go and drink and eat and have a discussion, a community discussion about the shared values. I think that film as the dominant image system of media, it is the most popular storytelling form that's ever existed in human history.
Yeah.
It has slipped into that position. When movies like this come out, people are able to ask, what is more horrifying than losing the trust of a child, or abusing the trust of a child?
Right.
You know, what kind of people are those? What kind of people do we want to be? So something, you know, a lot of people consider horror to be kind of ephemeral and not important. I think that things that deal with powerful positive emotions, powerful negative emotions can be some of our most important art.
Well, if that's the case, then this this is one of the best in terms of Black horror filmmaking. And, you know, the way some people might consider this more drama than horror, but I would point out that there are hints of magic in the story. It's kissed with magic. The filmmaker intentionally is vague about how powerful this hoodoo woman, for example, played by Diane Carroll in this scene is, whether Aunt Mademoiselle really does know the future. Is she really cursed? I think that, there are hints that would say yes to all of those questions, but then there are rational people who might argue no. just as you can argue whether it was actually Eve's curse that caused Samuel L. Jackson's character to get killed, or was it his own philandering and opening his mouth and running his mouth? I think that, or is it a combination of the two things? But there's a real tribute to traditional black magic systems, hoodoo, voodoo, all of that in here. We have Diane Carroll, and there's a diversity in the depiction. So Diane Carroll was kind of a street vendor style hoodoo fortune teller. And she and Moselle, who is more of the prim proper, come into my home and will sit at my table kind, have nothing but contempt for each other. I don't know if it's a bit of professional rivalry or what, but there certainly seems to be that. And it might be argued that they both have powers. It really could be argued that they either predict the future, or perhaps a bit of hoodoo does lead to Samuel L. Jackson's death. Or was Eve just channeling future knowledge based on her understanding of her father's mistakes? So just as Cassie Lemons, the director-writer, leaves the circumstances of that incestuous father-daughter kiss for us to decide what happened, who initiated it, was it the father who initiated it, was the daughter who initiated it? Either way, it's not okay. Either way, he created the environment for that kiss. So,
well, I mean, he's the one who should have known what it represented.
Right.
He's the one who has to draw the line. The kid is just thinking, "Oh, mommy kisses daddy. Why shouldn't I?" They're not considering the danger that is going on there. It's up to the adult to say no. Absolutely. It's up to the adult to push away.
Absolutely.
You know, it drives me crazy when I hear child abuse. Oh, that was the most seductive little child you ever saw. It's horror.
Yeah.
It's real horror.
And so this is just one of my absolute favorite films in the Black horror canon. And it's a real privilege to teach it. And it's also a good way to lead into a discussion of my book, The Good House, which I published in 2003, and which also echoes some of the themes in Eve's Bayou. Just a quick list of the themes in The Good House. Now, where Eve's Bayou does not address racism openly, The Good House very much does address racism. We'll talk about that. We have the magic and ritual with Marie Toussaint and her gifts. We have the secrets. The secrets are perhaps the true villain of this story, because the outcome of the entire story is resolved by the telling of secrets and the healing from telling secrets. Retribution. We will see that coming up as a theme in our homework film, which is Tales from the Hood by Rusty Cundiff. But yes, retribution is very much a theme in The Good House. Curses, responsibility. Grandma Marie lives with the responsibility of what she did. Corey is living with the silent responsibility of what he did. And also loss of innocence. Corey is older than Eve. He's 15. But those of you who have followed my work know that I come time and again to child protagonists, and I'm very much gnawing away at that wound that is loss of innocence. You know, that moment where one day you're a child. I had a student come up to me and talk about how she lost her childhood when she was 17, the day her father died. Ooh. And then her mother had a nervous breakdown. Ooh. And then she was responsible for all her siblings. It's like, boom. Like sometimes it's just like you walk through a doorway and you've gone from child to adult in one fell swoop. And this is often where horror thrives for me. If we can just go back to the to the bigger screen, I'd like to just talk to folks about a little bit about The Good House. So this is my copy here. Came out in 2003. I actually pretty much designed this cover because this is a real house called the Bradley House. If you're in the Pacific Northwest, it's in a town called Caplamette, Washington. The Bradley House is still a bed and breakfast. If you want to go, stay there.
Well, I definitely want to sleep there.
It's not up on the top of a hill, and it's not near the woods. It's back in the middle of downtown. But in any case, I did extract it for my set for The Good House, and I spent a lot of time there. Never overnight, but all of the little details about the house and the window seats, and a lot of those details are actually true details from the house. There is a lot of different kind of truth in this novel. And before I get to the exact reason I wrote The Good House, I'd like to point out that I wanted it to be my scariest book. Some people think it is. I really wanted it to scare even me. And in order to do that, I took every terrifying thing that I had heard about in the past couple years, and I rolled it into the story just as an example, I had a friend in Miami whose teenage son shot himself. And so it was one of those situations where she was sharing custody. Friday, she talked to him on the phone and everything was fine. By Sunday, he was dead from a self inflicted wound. And she never knew if it was an accidental shooting or suicide. So, and I went to that funeral and I saw that horror that ripped through her life at the loss of a son. It's the loss of a child is still the biggest loss I can think of. So I did absolutely incorporate that in the story, sort of seeking meaning, I guess. A lot of the horror I write is to sort of make sense. And his having been possessed makes more sense than whatever actually happened. I mean, if he, God forbid, was just looking at the gun and it accidentally went off, that makes no sense, as a parent or someone who has a friend. So there was that. And there was also a situation where someone I know knew a shaman who had performed a ceremony and thought they had encountered a possessed person and did a little, okay, whatever, you're healed, and thought it was over. And then within only, let's say an hour, got a phone call from hundreds of miles away that a family member had gotten up at the dinner table, looked to a spouse, said, I have to kill you now, and tried to kill that person as if, say, they were possessed. The person I know actually had to convey this information, and therefore, according to the shaman, that person was also involved. The shaman realized right away what he thought had happened was that demon that I thought I exorcised has actually come through the back door. So invited the person who spread the news, everybody was touched by it, did a ceremony and a different kind of cleansing. And sure enough, according to the story, almost immediately a phone call came that the relative who had been acting strangely, who was now literally in a straitjacket, snapped out of it and said, what happened? Okay, now you can believe that or not. You can believe that or not.
The person that she knows this has happened to was known to say that before this incident that he would go anywhere at any time at any cost to see a supernatural event. After this thing happened, he retracted.
Yeah, maybe you don't want to see a supernatural event.
No, I think that was about as close as this person ever wanted to come.
So for that reason, that really loomed obviously large over the whole story. I thought, what if I wrote a story about a demon that was more powerful than the shaman thought, and then the demon came through the back door? And what would that kind of encounter look like across generational lines? Something that you couldn't even fix in one generation. A problem so big that it would take 2 generations, 3 generations to fix it. So that's where The Good House came from. At the time I wrote it, Steve and I were living in the Pacific Northwest, which was new for me. Longview, Washington. It was about a 30-minute drive on that road I described with the falling rocks and the deer. Yeah, that road was a real road. And that was the road to get to this town, Willamette, where I set the story. But where we lived was only 30,000 people. It wasn't that much bigger. And it was a real culture shock for me. So if you think back to The Good House, that first scene where Andre is walking down the street, lost in the suburb, that was me in Longview. I felt like I stuck out a great deal. There were not many Black people living in Longview. When they did encounter Black people in a very friendly way, they would refer to them as colored and this was in the 90s and early 2000s. So this was not in the 50s or the 60s. I just want to point out the term colored has not been in use for a very long time, but the news had not reached this town I lived in, which was Longview, Washington. So just imagine going from Miami, which is where I grew up, and one of the most diverse cities in the United States, to Longview, Washington, where I was there, with love in my heart, because that's where my husband lived, and his daughter was being raised by his ex-wife. And we were there for 6 years, and I was in till the end. But the last couple of years, I decided, rather than feeling outcast and miserable, I was going to embrace this setting and write a novel unlike one I had ever written, meaning that the outdoors would be a character. I almost set it up as a prompt for myself, write a novel where the outdoors is a character. Because having grown up in suburbs, in Miami, in the air conditioning, I didn't know what these trees were called. I didn't, my mother took me fishing a few times, but as an adult, I didn't go fishing. The Pacific Northwest is a very outdoors culture, even with all that rain. So that was one of my challenges. And the other challenge was to address my feeling of isolation. And then I also folded in this idea of secrets. All families have secrets. There are things that I intend to talk about with, to Jason when he's older, my son Jason when he's older. There are some things that I still feel are none of his business, even having written this. But the point is, whenever parents keep secrets from their children, sometimes it's shame, and sometimes you don't want to give them an accidental model. I get that. But a lot of the time it's to protect them from the pain of knowing, to protect them. So, and a lot of, we've talked about this, how in a lot of African-American families, you don't have to go back too far before there's a birth that people don't want to talk about that resulted from a rape, for example, or coercion, or, often the secrets are sexual. They have to do with incest. They have to do with rape. So on an unconscious level, even though I was not writing overtly about incest and rape, that is sort of what I had in mind in terms of what some of the most damaging family secrets are. Because even if you don't tell your children this happened to you, the way you flinch when you're touched tells them something happened, or makes them feel like you're flinching from them instead of from your memory. So in that way, this secret is still in the room. It's still in the air that we breathe, even if we never utter a word about it. And that was what I wanted to convey in The Good House. That Grandma Marie, for all of her reasons, felt that she needed to protect Angela from this knowledge. So she kept her rituals separate from Angela for the most part. She had a secret altar room rather than, those open spaces where Angela might have learned more. She didn't tell Angela about the demon. She didn't tell Angela her suspicion that her mother had mental illness directly because of the influence of this demon. She didn't tell. The list goes on and on. And then in the current generation of The Good House, it's Corey primarily who's keeping secrets, as teenagers will. And his secrets seem innocent, so innocent. I mean, I remember I broke one of my mother's plates once, and I was so afraid of getting in trouble, I threw it in a canal that was off of our backyard. I was like, thank goodness. Yeah. Although I was so guilty about it, I had to tell her later. So Corey, and I should have brought the ring. My aunt, Priscilla Krause, gave me a ring when I was 10 years old from West Africa. And I loved it. It has all these, it's really the ring. I modeled the ring in The Good House after. And I was wearing it one day when I auditioned for a school play of Mary Poppins. I still remember I did a cartwheel. And when I got home, my ring was gone. I think it might have been a while before I mentioned to my mom that I had lost that ring. I have since inherited my grandmother's version of that same ring, but my ring is gone, and I was afraid to tell my mother. So Corey was afraid to tell his mother he had lost this ring. And those lies, those secrets kind of on a spiritual level open the door for magic to go wrong. They open the door. Also, what opens the door for magic to go wrong is rage. Rage is another theme that emerges in The Good House. Grandma Marie, let's start with her. Her rage is justified. I always mention to my students, Steve, that we've adapted this book to script probably 3 separate times now, right? Is it
something like that?
So 3 separate times. And every time we adapt it to script, we change it so that Grandma Marie's husband, John, is not just beaten up, but murdered. Because in the book, with more context, you can understand how her rage is fueled by her previous loss of a husband who did die violently in New Orleans. And there's all this backstory behind her reaction. But in the film version, we can never really get into that. Right. So you only know what you see. So we would see a bunch of men kill her husband. She gets mad. She goes in the garden and accidentally causes a mudslide. She just wants revenge on those people. But she underestimated her own power. B, she underestimated the power of this demon. So she unleashed a force with so much power that she could not contain it. It surprised her. It overwhelmed her. Just as John said in the prologue, It knows you very well. It knew how to beat her. She could not turn those people away that came to her front porch. And that baka was right in her home. He said, "Don't bring it in our home." She brought it in their house. And that house was stained by this encounter with the baka for generations. And it took the telling of secrets, the revelation of secrets, to vanquish it. Grandma Marie had to tell her secrets through her journal, which Corey read and discovered, and if only he had shared it sooner. Grandma Marie is trying to communicate in all these ways that she can, in the rainfall or whatever she can, guiding Corey toward the book. And then in the what I call the do-over part, Corey confides in his mom. I didn't have a teenage son when I wrote this. I'm trying to think, how old was Nikki in 2003? Maybe I had a teenage stepdaughter.
2003?
Yeah, but
16.
Yeah, okay. I had a teenage stepdaughter. So parents, how hard it is to get teenagers to sit and open their hearts to you and talk to you. I was just discussing this with my cousin's wife, how when we're driving our sons to school, that's like the most open window we have. Whatever we want to talk about, we better get it on the table right then, because that door shuts. There's an openness for some reason on the way to school, but then it shuts when they come home. So it's very, very difficult sometimes to get teenagers to open up. And I guess if there was one thing I wanted to do with the way I kind of broke the storytelling rules at the end, and gave her that do-over, it was to give all of us as parents another chance, because sometimes you don't get that other chance. And something that seems like a small omission, a tiny experience, can just blow up in ways that you never anticipate. And I wanted, to heal my friend Jackie of that loss of her son. I wanted Corey to have a chance to grow up. And I wanted to have this opportunity to tell a story where racism motivated an act of retribution that ended up hurting not only those who were the racists, but those who were the victims of racists. So, I said in the very first lecture that I didn't go at racism as directly as Jordan Peele did in Get Out, that this book is more about the price of how you react to trauma than it is about the trauma itself, because we're also human. So just because someone rear-ends your car doesn't mean you have the right to go up to their window and shoot them, right? Yeah. I mean, you might be mad and your car is hurt or whatever. They might have called you a bad name, but we still have to take on this burden of not only the victimization, but how in becoming victimized, it alters our psyches, it alters our reactions, and we have to fight so hard not to become hateful sometimes, as Grandma Marie had a moment of hatefulness. So those are the major themes in The Good House. And Steve is writing me a note. Yes. So here's what we're going to do. We have a great interview to show you that would take us about to a 90-minute mark. So if you want to stay and watch that interview now, that's great. Or you could pause this and watch it later. But I want to, before we close, I want to talk about what the homework is.
Yeah, let's do the homework, say goodbye, and then we'll show the video. And then we'll also give them a link to the video.
Because we have a lot of exciting stuff happening. Next lecture, our special guest interview is with Tony Todd.
Yes!
From the iconic movie Candyman. He sat down on Skype with me and Steve, and I can't wait to share with you. Oh, it wasn't showing. I can't wait to share with you what Tony Todd had to say when we talked to him about Candyman. So that brings me to the homework, which is that you're supposed to watch Candyman. It's really hard to stream. It's difficult to find. I found a YouTube link. I assume is copyright okay. Or I don't know. I almost didn't link to it because I'm pretty sure it's not copyright okay. But someone put Candyman up on YouTube, and honestly, there are not very many other ways to watch it aside from ordering the DVD. It's on a streaming site called VUDU that I never heard of, but that's the only other place I saw it. Watch Tales from the Hood. That is streaming everywhere. You can watch that on Amazon. You can watch that on YouTube. I checked that for you. Rusty Cunniff will talk about that. That, frankly, is probably the best known Black horror film before Get Out. Would you agree?
I would agree.
Yeah, so it was the Get Out of its day in
And
some
I
very
would
different
say
ways.
that at least the 4 segments,
Yes.
and at least 2 of them, I think, are just dynamite. I mean, just absolutely kick butt. Oh my God, type stuff.
They're all fascinating.
Yeah.
They're all fascinating. So do watch Tales from the Hood. And then there's a great novelette. It's called, so it's longer than a short story, shorter than a novel, called The Devil in America by a fairly new writer named Kai Ashante Wilson. That is so scary and so deep, and I can't wait to discuss it with you. So that's the homework for next week. But moving into the interview, we are going to talk to Dr. Kenitra Brooks. She was an editor, or rather just got a Bram Stoker Award nomination as an editor for this anthology of women's horror and poems called Sycorax's Daughters. And she just published, within weeks, a book called Searching for Sycorax, Black Women's Hauntings of Contemporary Horror, where she writes about Black women horror writers, some of them I didn't know. So this is a fantastic resource. She knows a lot about her subject, and I was very glad to be able to sit down with her for a 30-minute conversation not long ago. So without further ado, here is Bram Stoker nominated editor, Dr. Kenitra Brooks. And we are here with the Dr. Kenitra Brooks, who teaches at the University of Texas, San Antonio. Hello. Thank you so much for appearing in our webinar, The Sunken Place, and taking part. Thank you for your scholarship. I mean, I don't have your newest. I have the anthology you co-edited, Sycorax's Daughters, with Linda D. Addison and Susanna Morris. But you also have a new book that we will talk about, Searching for Sycorax. And I want to know, but there's so much I want to ask you. So I want to go back to the very beginning. What is it that draws you to horror in particular?
You know, I enjoy being scared, and this is how I know it's time for me to write about horror again. I have a recurring zombie dream. Ooh. And where the zombies are coming, I know they're coming, and I have to prepare my family for them to come, right? And my mom's always like, well, let me just pack a little bit more food. Let me do this, and I'm like, wow, they're coming. We don't believe. So whenever I have a zombie dream, I'm like, okay, it's time for me to write about horror again. But I opened my book with me seeing Katrina in Banff the very first time at the Joy Theater, right? My aunt took me to see it, and my cousin Lee. And I see her, I notice her, but she doesn't talk the entire film. And even as a little kid, I was like, something's wrong. Why isn't she talking?
Right.
And they took all of her features that made her Black, that made her so beautiful, and exaggerate them to make her monstrous.
Right.
And it's even since back then, seeing her on the big screen at the Joy Theater in New Orleans in 84, 85, that's when really my horror career started.
That's it. And that's Grace Jones, correct?
Yes, it's Grace Jones.
Let's not forget to mention Queen Grace Jones. So they're drawn to it, but already as a child discerning, what's up with this? Something is up. And I also wonder because, I came to horror through my mother, who was a civil rights activist, the late Patricia Stevens. I always feel like I need to call her name because she was constantly telling me, call my name.
They will make sure. In my family, they come and visit.
My mother was not enough. And it's not enough now. But she loved horror, and that's where my love of it came. I let her babysit for my son once, and he came back talking about demons when he was 2, and I was like, well, that's because you were at Grandma's house. And, I've come to understand that she used horror as a way to process her trauma of not only putting her body on the line during the civil rights movement, but later, the constant, whether it's the microaggressions or working with parents, working for fair housing, working for education, just over and over and over again. Do you think there's a trauma processing aspect of horror that also appeals to you?
Definitely. I say this because, I really want to get into and read Jesmyn Ward. There are some Black women authors whose work I really want to get into, but at this point, I'm like, I need some kind of magic. I need a conjure woman or a spell or something like that to just help me because of the research I do and the work being with it every day. I want that element of fantasy, that element of power, that certain agency that Black women have
Yes.
manifested in a magical way. Right?
Yes.
And that's why some books just stay at one part of my pile, because I'm like, I just need that element to get me through,
I
right?
understand.
And it's some stuff I just need. It can be dark. I have no problem with dark, but sometimes I just need a little bit of magic.
Magic. It's that magic is that missing equation. I couldn't agree more. It's my favorite kind of reading. It's my favorite kind of viewing. It doesn't always have to be scary, but if something can scare me, that is the best.
I'm so scary though. That's the thing.
Really?
I'm always like making my husband watch these movies with me, and he's not a fan. And I'm just like, I'm too scared. And they're like, and I have friends who will watch things for me beforehand. Like Tracy Salisbury, she's a professor and she studies horror. And what she does is she'll say like, "That's too scary for you. You're not gonna be able to handle that one." I was like, "Oh, okay, no, I won't do it."
Oh, okay. Well, maybe we need to get back to what crosses the line for you and what doesn't. But we'll circle back to that if we have time.
Okay.
Because I really want to get to the meat and potatoes of your work. I saw some excerpts. I don't have Searching for Sycorax yet. But I had some excerpts I was reading online, Google Books and Amazon, wherever I could sneak some peeks at it. And
I can send you a copy. I'll just send you a copy.
Fine, we'll make that happen. I was looking for a Kindle version. It's like, doggone it, but I'm going to read what I can for free here. But anyway, you talk about the final girl in horror, that usually white heroine who is able to overcome the monster without help from the outside, but making the observation that racially she is viewed differently and presented differently. Okay, and your quote is, "For the Black woman's display of strength, it's read pejoratively, even as the strength of the white final girl is read as positive, plucky, instead of pathological, independent initiative and not a series of acts threatening castration." I hope I read that right. I think I read that right. And then again from your prologue, this question you ask, why didn't anyone rescue the Black woman? Why did she always have to rescue herself? And these are two, so let me ask you about the relationship of horror and Black women from that very first time you were exposed to Vamp and you had questions about it. I'm thinking to how Michonne didn't speak.
Yes.
Was nonverbal. The first season, at least, she appeared. I don't know how long it went beyond that. How has horror, cinema, and television treated Black women in general, I'd say up to this point, in your view?
That's why I keep having the name Sycorax come up, because it's based upon Sycorax from the Shakespeare's The Tempest. And she's often read as a Black woman. And she occupied the island before Prospero comes. She's Caliban's mother, and she's supposedly dead, right? And she was a witch, and she had power and magic. And yet, even though she's dead, even though Prospero has literally enslaved her son, he still keeps calling out her name. It's like, you won, right? You won. She's not there anymore. Why do you keep calling her out? Why are you obsessed with her? And so I talk about Black women as an absent presence in horror, right? They're erased in these weird sorts of ways, and yet when their presence is there, it shows and it appears in ways that fundamentally change horror, right? And pushes horror in directions that aren't even considered, right? And that's why I want to do my work in an academic way, right? What ways do Black women, when they are in horror and when they are creators of horror, how do they fundamentally change horror as it is?
Interesting. What would you point out as one of the biggest fundamental changes when Black women tell their own stories in horror?
I would say bringing in the folklore, bringing in the orality, bringing in the traditional West African practices that are there, right? We see that in You're the Good House, right? That where the practices and the voodoo haunts the family in some senses causes the problems, but it's also the key to solving the problems, right? And so you have where these practices are not something that's scary. These practices are respected, and these practices are a place in a sense of agency and healing.
Right. Right. It's like my class at UCLA, we looked at the serpent and the rainbow, you know.
Yes.
And we're like, who would follow this religion? Because there's no healing aspect of it. There seems to be no faith, no positive faith aspect of it. It's all monstrosity.
And also it's like, and I talked to Ibby Zaboy, who's of Haitian descent, and she these people were botanists, root workers at their element, at their essence. They're botanists, they're scientists. There are levels of science that these people understood that was not respected, and that Westernity is just beginning to try to understand.
Right. And of course, because it's a cinematic approach to it, he had to, Wes Craven, and I love Wes Craven, a lot of his work, never dissing him, entirely, but in this particular film, it just really stands out that he had to pick out the monstrosity of it.
Really? I know, right? And that's the, and again, it's that sort of absent presence. Like when you finally do deal with us, it's in jacked up ways, right? So it's about interrogating and saying, no. And I think that's why more and more of us are creators, why more and more of us are taking the reins and saying, we're going to write ourselves into this and we're going to fundamentally change it because you're going to have to reckon with us.
Yes, absolutely. And talk about a reckoning. I mean, I want to frame where we are now first by looking at sort of where we came from, and I can only really reference the 90s, which is when I started publishing, and which was the last time I felt like we had a growing Black horror community. L.A. Banks was still living back then.
Yeah.
Brandon Massey was doing his anthologies, Dark Dreams. So, like in science fiction, we had this time when a lot of people were publishing, and those of us who were a little bit off the beaten track were getting some love too. Yeah. And then it all kind of dissipated for a while. Like in cinema, the whole movement of the 90s kind of dissipated for a while, and then we lost Octavia, obviously. But now it's all coalescing again. And I would say in the case of Black horror, in some ways that are absolutely unique. And I would look to your scholarship as an indication of that. I love Horror Noir by Dr. Robin Hermes Coleman. Amazing. I mean, I want to have just all three of us just sit and have a long all-night conversation.
And she's been very, very supportive of my career and things like that. Because, she was the first one to sort of do it. And I was like, okay. And her being successful in what she did allowed me and paved the way for me to be successful in my work.
Well, I really believe, as I believed in the 90s, the more the merrier. When L.A. Banks showed up with her Vampire Huntress series, I was so excited. I was like, yes, this is exactly what we as a community need. And when I see new scholarship like yours, that's why I was so excited about Jordan Peele's Get Out. I mean, he's like bringing Black horror into people's mouths, in a way that's different and enables all of us to sort of climb up and say, hey, we're here too. And we're creating.
There's room for us all, and we are responsible for bringing up other folks too. Yes. Agreed.
So, and one of the things I really like about Sycorax's Daughters and a lot of your scholarship is that you're focusing not on, there's some mentioning of the names that people are more familiar with, but you really are looking for new talent that's somewhat unsung. How would you characterize sort of the breadth of the Black talent out there in terms of Black horror, especially women?
Yeah, it's there. And so, and as a fan of yours and as a fan of Octavia Butler, and I just knew that there was more. And I was like, okay, we have Tanana Redo. I said, she does awesome work, but I know that there are other people that are doing, and I heard about your work and Nalo's work and you guys guiding sort of upcoming people and knowing and getting folks out there. So again, we will get that depth of talent that I think is necessary and that keeps things going and makes it harder for them to just cut it off like you spoke of in the 90s, right? We have the technology, a lot of independent film, a lot of self-publishing and things like that. I think that's giving people voices and giving people streams of income that isn't so dependent on these institutions, right?
That's key.
Yeah. Again, the technology is being pushed in this way where we can have more agency, and I think in a way in which you and Butler and Hopkinson sort of paved the way for the upcoming generations to do that, as well as keeping these, and I'm glad you talked about this, keeping these healthy and healthful relationships, right? Of saying that there's room for everyone.
Yes.
Everyone has a place, right? I'm sitting on Chesia Burks. I'm on her committee now. I'm on her dissertation committee, and I said in the book, and I was like, "Yo, tear me up if necessary. Let me know where are my gaps. Fill it in, because the more we're having this conversation, tension is okay. We don't always have to run from the conflict of it, because we're going to disagree. But again, that makes it richer, and that's what I love to do, and that's what I love about us, and that's also why I had the breadth of Sycorax's daughters, right? I reckon, some horror isn't my type of horror, but I did want to say that Black women are writing this type of horror, even if it's not your thing, right? It's being done. So again, there are no excuses for you to say Black women don't do this, because that's how you tick me off when people are like, "Oh no, Black women don't do this."
And you mentioned a quote at the beginning in one of your epigraphs is someone saying that there aren't any Black horror writers, and I just saw something on Twitter. I forget who it was tweeting that they were having a meeting with an executive saying Black women.
Tracy Oliver, I think she's a producer.
Okay, Black women don't, and I'm like, what? In what universe? Because I've seen Sycorax's Daughters, and I've been publishing since 1995, and I know a whole lot of other folks have also been publishing for some time, and there are a lot of folks publishing now. So it's so interesting how people take their own ignorance and just accept it as fact without
make it law,
a simple Google search. I mean, Google is free every day.
Every day. And I tweeted them. I was like, well, I've written 2 books about it. So to say that Black women, and again, I learned this love from my aunts, my dad's sisters, right? We would they would show me this film, Night of the Living Dead, Return of the Living Dead, all these things I would watch at their house and come back like scared out of my mind, right? But I learned that love from them.
Yes.
And I think that has to be respected. And also there's a history of this for us, right? I talk about how it's been in our folklore. It's been in our oral story. It's been in our myths of the Sukuyon, of the Buhag, of all of these things, right? When Zora Neale Hurston, when she's collecting stories, she's got Hank tales and devil tales and possession tales. All of this stuff has long been here in our culture. It's just you weren't looking in the right place for it.
Right. And I think even in some of the wider horror community, I recently did an interview with a reporter from Toronto who was sort of incredulously asking, well, what is this Black horror? Almost like, why do we need to call it Black horror? Isn't it just horror? And,
because what scares you doesn't scare me.
Thank you. and yes, and you've talked a little bit about the folklore and the magic. Also, some works we see that fear of white supremacy at work. All these themes. How is Black horror special to you and to us, would you say? As a subgenre of horror, obviously.
Yeah. And I'm obsessed with this quote Dr. Jonathan Gale said the other day, that Black people have the right to imagine, right? And I just love the possibilities which any genre of fiction, but particularly Black horror, because again, you're taking a lot of times stories that are very, very old and remixing them and revising them and putting them together and taking a little bit here and taking, and making your own recipe, right? And Get Out works because it's basically Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but in a way that's very, very raced and gendered in very, very specific ways, right? So you're taking old stories and old tales, things that have long scared us, and putting our spin on it. And I just love that about Black folks. I love that about us. I love our ability and our imagination and our demanding of our right to imagine, whether folks let us or not. Right.
Just if they don't give it to you, then just take it.
Just take it.
One of the films that I teach under Black horror is Eve's Bayou. It's a drama, some people wouldn't call it horror, but this whole definition of horror, as you well know, is so loosey-goosey. You discuss that in your book as well. And one of mine is, does it scare me? A, and B, doesn't involve magical realism. She hints at it, so ding, horror.
And I'm
Mm-hmm.
wondering, I watched it only once in the 90s. It was a lot for me when it first
Yes.
came out. But now I'm looking at it with different eyes. Could you talk a little bit about Eve's Bayou? Is it horror to you? Would you call it horror?
Yes. I
Yeah.
would call it horror. And because I have this, it rubs me the wrong way when some people are like, oh no, this is too good to be horror. Or, oh no, this is too elegant to be horror, right? There's an elegance in good horror, right?
Yes.
And I love Eve's Bayou for many reasons, not just because it's horror, because again, it's taking the Conjuring tradition, right? Diane Carroll's character is
Yes.
a conjure woman.
Yes.
That is magic. That is spells. That is our horror,
Yes.
right? So,
Yes.
and again, in the Bayou, you're taking things that are very, very Louisiana. I'm a New Orleans native.
Oh, okay. So
It's
speaking
very,
your
very
language.
important to me.
Right.
Yes,
Right.
right. Very, very important to me. But also this idea of Black Southern and feminine, and in my reading, feminist elegance, right?
Mm-hmm.
I love oh my God, it just left me, the mother character, the actress.
Oh, I know who. Oh Lord, now you
Yeah.
spread it to me, but
Lynn,
we'll look it up. Lynn Whitfield.
Lynn Whitfield, yes. Lynn Whitfield. I love that sort of elegance. I love that sort of Black women wearing diamonds in the afternoon. That sort of Lana Turner sort of thing. That just gets me. That's my own. But that, the supernatural, can exist right there with the real, with the hyper real, right? Really. And also this idea of, it brings me back to Toni Morrison, right? And her quote talking about Black folks are very pragmatic people. Like, some stuff are very real. We have to deal with these things. But there's also this element of magic, this element of the supernatural that we live with every day, that we accept. And I thought that Eve's Bayou was just such a wonderful and beautiful reflection of that.
Yes.
I thought in the character of Samuel L. Jackson's, his sister, and how she can read people, and Moselle, right? How
yes,
she can read
Debbie
people,
Morgan.
and how she has, and also how she's gendered, right? There's this fluidity in her sort of gender construction, right? Because, she literally screws loves like a man, right? She's a serial monogamous, and she's an adulteress, and all these things. But also we get to see how it's constructed in Moselle as well as in the Samuel L. Jackson character, right? So we get these ideas of heritage. We get these ideas of family curses. Again, these are things that are supernatural that, again, lends it to horror.
Right. And embedded in there is the human horror of this betrayal of this family and this loss of innocence. It's just, that's the part that just breaks my heart. And also...
And when she talks about her husband, and the one comes and he's like, you're going to leave my house. And I'm like, oh my God. And,
yes.
But also this idea of her being haunted by her decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Absolutely.
And the choices she made, right?
Yes.
And we have to consider this idea of haunting, that it's very, very real. The ghosts of her decisions are literally living with her.
Oh my goodness, that's so true. That's so true. And that thing about people considering works too good to be horror, I find that so irritating. We hear it over and over.
The New York Times just did another thing on it, and where this isn't horror and this can't be. Let's call it. I think Peele was trying to get out a supernatural thriller,
social thriller. I know from back in the day, they would avoid the word horror when I was publishing. It was even when Stephen King blurred My Soul to Keep, he called it supernatural suspense, because that was the phrase that was acceptable, so that people would buy books. That there's always something. But I'm proud of the label horror,
yes.
Because
and it's us, and again and again. We change it when we do it. That's my thing. I was like, we make our own definition of it when we are doing it. So don't tell me what it is.
Absolutely. A new twist. I know these are hard. I don't want to ask you some of your favorite authors, but I hate when people ask me that, because then I'm going to have friends mad at me. But who are some of your favorite horror authors? Some of whom maybe most people in the class might not have heard about. And also I'd like to know some of your favorite horror films, like a couple of your favorite horror films. They don't have to.
Okay.
They don't have to be Black.
I'll talk about two of my favorite horror films first. So my first favorite horror film is 28 Days Later. It is damn near perfect for me.
It's great, yes.
And I love it because Selena gets to grow and develop in it, right? And it becomes this sort of what I think is a great partnership or family dynamic of where they're rescuing each other at the end, right? At the beginning, you know, Jim, she has to rescue him. She's that strong Black woman. She's got the machete and all of these things. And it's problematic. Anytime something happens to him, he starts calling her out like, you know, she's his mom or something like that, right? But as it grows on and as they grow together, you know, it becomes a friendship. It becomes a possible relationship. But it's also this, they depend on each other along with Hannah, right? And she gets to be saved at the end. The Black woman, the strong Black woman, gets to be saved at the end. And people push back on this idea of the damsel of distress. But when she is racialized, it changes the dynamic. Because a damsel in distress is someone who is worth risking life and limb to make sure that they stay alive.
And we don't get that as Black women.
It's a social value. It's a certain value. And is it problematic? Yes. Is it screwy? Yes. But that doesn't change the reality of it and what it can potentially do. The other short film that I really, really love is I really love Bree Newsom's Wake.
Yeah.
It's a short 20-minute film. I write about it in the book too.
That was their homework.
I think it's beautiful. I think it's damn near perfect. I wish it were a full feature.
I know.
I think she's talking about these tensions. And again, horror is always reflecting our anxieties, right? Our cultural anxieties. And you get the protagonist who makes these harsh decisions because as a Black woman of a certain age, she isn't seen as a full or a real woman because she's not married with kids, right? And so she literally starts to make deals with devils to make sure she fulfills these societal expectations of her, right? And so then you start to get this really interesting conversation about what Black women are willing to do. And this all came out, right, with all those. Remember a couple of years ago, all those like, Black women, you're going to die alone.
Oh, yes.
Nobody loves you. You ugly. Okay, Cupid, you can't find a date. You know, right? So it's all these cultural anxieties and how far are Black women willing to go to fulfill these ideas of what Black womanhood should be.
Beautiful.
In terms of authors, of course, I love The Living Blood.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I just love it. And I love The Living Blood because it made me like Jessica. Because in the first one, I was like, Jessica, come on, girl.
That's fair.
Like, girl, come on, Jessica. And then I was like, oh, okay, all right, Jessica, fight with the baby. All right, yeah, you know, you got to have a conversation with Dave because he wilding out.
That's funny. Well, I appreciate that. She did have to grow. She had a way to come.
I also enjoy Chesia Burke's work. I really like her work. It's really, really good. She's got Say She Toy. She has Q Change, which is sort of a zombie story with the protagonist. She has her collected works of Let's Play White.
Oh,
and she has this really, really interesting story that I teach all the time called I Make People Do Bad Things.
Yes. Now, in my UCLA class, we read Please Mama, which is one of her stories.
Yes.
Yes, but I need to check out her collection and add it to the list of resources.
I Make People Do Bad Things is excellent. The students love it. It brings in all these questions about what is moral, what is good. It takes place in the 20s with Madame St. Clair and the numbers running bumpy and the 40.
Right.
Yeah. And so you start to get these questions of a little girl who can make people do bad things.
Absolutely.
Right? And, you know, she, excuse me, her use as an assassin, right? What are the morality tales of that and what are the moral issues with that? So I really love Chesia Burke. I think she's going to kill me for saying this, but I see N.K. Jemisin as a horror author.
Okay, that's
she
fine.
She does not see herself as one.
Well, you know what? Toni Morrison doesn't consider Beloved horror either, but that's in the eye of the beholder, I say.
I know, right? Like, it's a haunted house story. It's a ghost, like a ghost. It's literally. I don't know.
But that's that label.
That problem with horror. horror, right? Like people don't want to talk about it, right?
Yes.
I love Jewel Gomez.
Yes.
I love because she brings not just the love, but the groundbreaking. She brings queerness to horror, right?
Right.
She's doing all these really, really interesting things. And she's helping to support the community of horror writers that are there, right?
Right. That's beautiful. And she just reissued, or at least last year, the Guild of Stories. So
yes, had her to the school and she gave a talk, and she was just excellent. She was just excellent. And the work she's doing is important, and her writing. And I also love her writing as a critic. She's written some critical articles that are excellent, talking about speculative fiction very early on.
Oh, great. So everyone check out Jewel Gomez. Thank you for all those great names, and thank you so much. Is there something that you wish somebody would ask you that no one ever has, that you've always wanted to say, that you can think of to close it out? Not to put you on the spot.
No, I don't know. I can't think of a question now because I got to talk about horror.
Okay, cool. I know, right? So I did an interview where I was literally, like, my eyes were watering the whole time because I think it just touched me so deeply that people care finally about this thing, Black horror in particular, that I have cared about so much.
I know.
It's having its day.
And thank you for your work. I mean, you have been toiling away behind the scenes. And I think sometimes people will see you pop up and they'll say, oh, there's an anime do, but not recognizing the daily work that you're doing and making sure that this is taken seriously, that it survives, and that the work is done. And I appreciate that because I would not be here without you.
Oh, well, I appreciate you. And there are a lot of scholars and writers who would not have their work taken seriously if not for you and other scholars like you. So thank you for your work. Thank you for your scholarship and your time. And you have been to The Sunken Place.
Awesome.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right. So that was Dr. Kenitra Brooks. Wasn't that brilliant? I love hearing her unpack even just the works we had just discussed. Sometimes, coincidentally, she didn't even realize that we would have watched. So anyway, you see the homework. As soon as this link is up and ready, we'll get that up on the syllabus page. Always check your syllabus page. We update that with the newest lecture materials, the newest homework. And you guys have a great week. We'll see you next Saturday, the 17th.
Take care, guys.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.